Hi, I'm Ruth. I'm an anthropologist, a dyslexia researcher and collaborator, and a university lecturer. These different tips and techniques are created out of the research that I've undertaken. What I've created is these things called the 3 M's: mapping, making and modelling. Different ways to adapt what is often neurotypical ways of doing things into the neurodivergent way of doing things. The first one we're going to look at is lecture notes, and we're going to do part 1 here where we look at the actual taking of the notes, and then part 2 as to what on earth you actually do with the notes once you've got them. So you're sitting in class, the lecture has started, and your lecturer throws up a slide like this. Not particularly helpful, full of words and lots of white everywhere. What do you do with it? So let's start with the first of the 3 M's. Let's start with mapping. Now you'll know a lot about mind mapping, so I'm not going to really focus in on that. I'll do a bit of a talk about that in a minute. But what I want to focus on here with mapping is this idea of your lecture as a journey. Now this takes a little bit of planning. So if you take a large piece of paper, like an A3, and you go through all of the notes that your lecturer has given you about the lecture to come. So maybe you've got a lecturer who's really onto it and has given you the PowerPoint slides ahead. What you do is you go through and you have a look at those slides, look at the things that are bolded, look at the things that have stars or asterisks next to them, and put them down on your page so that when you get to your lecture you've already got these main points written down. These are a bit like your beauty spots. So if you think about if you're on a journey, you stop and you look at different things. These are your different stopping points. And then as the lecture goes on, you add extra information to each of these spots as you stand there and look around and expand on them. The big thing to remember to do here is to draw those joining arrows as you connect your information so that the journey becomes clear. Remember, a lecture isn't just simply about information, it's about your learning and your growing and your developing your skill set. So it's about you connecting with that material in the way that works best for you. There's also mind mapping, and there's an awful lot on YouTube about how to do mind mapping, and there's even specific mind mapping for dyslexics. The main thing I would recommend if you're thinking about using mind mapping is finding the one that works best for you. There are a lot of digital softwares out there, and one may work better for you than a different one does. So find the one that connects. If you prefer to draw, make sure you've got a good sized piece of paper to be able to put that information down. Let it be what it is, and then you can unpack that later. The next of the 3 is making. Now making has both a visual component or it can have an oral component, and so we'll look at both of those. So first of all, let's think about this idea of making as visual. Now we know that there's a lot of studies about the visual and the use of doodling in particular in university. For some there is this thing that it works, for others they say that it doesn't. The main thing that does come out is structured doodling does make some difference. But I want to bring in a different idea here from a dyslexic perspective, and that's doodling with a purpose. Having a reason for the drawing to be there, using it as an active way to engage with the information that your lecturer is actually giving you, finding a way to connect that information. So as you'll see here, using this word worldview, it opens up a possibility for creating a visual note rather than just a textual note, mixing in the text with it rather than it being text dominant. Now I don't know about you, but I find full text pages extremely boring and scanning them from information is problematic. But often with this technique, you scan the visual and then you connect the text afterwards. So it can make it easier for you to connect to your notes as you're writing them as well. Now I also mentioned the oral. Now this is actually the easiest one really to do in that lecture space because you hit play and you just record what your lecturer is saying. There are a few things to think about when you do the oral way of recording. Number 1. Make sure that you aren't too far away from the front. This is particularly important if you have really bad lecturers who, like me, actually walk around when we're talking and therefore aren't always in front of the mic. You want to make sure that you gather that information from us really moving lecturers. The other thing that you need to be thinking about is recording important information as you go along. So watch that time on your phone where you've hit record and jot down the time and then the important piece of information that's there that you are going to need to access later. Because let's be realistic here. If you record a lecture and it's all in one big block and you've got no notes whatsoever, you are either scanning back and forwards trying to find that piece of information, or you never ever listen to that lecture again. So it's about making sure that the notes become active, not just something that's ticked off and tucked away to be panicked about later when an assignment or a test comes in. The final thing to do with your phone is to make sure that you record something of yourself as well. So 5 minutes after class, disappear off with your phone and record your quick thoughts and your ideas that came up in that lecture. So it's not just your lecturer's voice on that recording, but it's also yours. Initially that might be quite hard, but as you get more repetitive in that action, it will become more familiar and more comfortable. The third of the 3 M's is modelling. I'm not going to talk about modelling here. This is something that will go very well with your oral part of making, with recording things on your phone, because if this is not something you can actually do when you're in the class, this is more something that you do after class with your recording. So it's about finding your best way into knowledge, your way into connecting and gaining information in that lecture space. The thing to do is to remember to get rid of those shoulds, what I should do as a student. That mystery big figure of the good student that sits there rapidly taking notes of everything the lecturer says. It's time to let that go and recognise that that person doesn't really exist. Or if they do, they're 1 in a billion. You've got to embrace your ways of getting into knowledge, your skill set, the things that help you to learn more, to gain more. Chalmers and Clark talk about this idea of the extended mind, and it's a really fascinating idea. It doesn't quite go far enough, I think, but it's an interesting idea that we don't just think with what's inside our skulls, but with everything that's around us. They ask this question about, well, where does the world begin and the mind end? So in using these different techniques, we're opening up the possibilities of the mind to explore, to think, to expand into these different ways of being. And let's face it, dyslexics are really good at expanding into possibilities and trying new things. You're creative, you're inventive, and it's making use of that skill set to be able to do incredible things. You find your way into knowledge, your way of connecting with the information. Not in a way that drains everything as you try to perform this idea of what a student is, but the way of gaining information that really works for you.